Welcome to The Long Rest, a token of respite after a busy day. Enjoy stories from both our world and worlds of make-believe, read by your favorite nerdy voice actors. For tonight's special, please enjoy two stories. A Winter's Feast, read by myself, Sam Riegel, and Himmelsschloss, The Castle in the Sky, read by Caleb Widogast. With that, sit back, relax, and enjoy a long rest. This is A Winter's Feast, written by William Lamborn and read by Sam Riegel. It was an icy morning in the mountain town of Crabberod. A family of fey-giants sat eating watery porridge in their small cottage home. Well, small for fey-giants, who are a bit larger and hairier than humans. Although the food was warm, the cottage was so cold that even the children's soft brown fur couldn't keep out the chill. The meal was a quiet one. Many had been lately ever since Father's cobbler shop went out of business. Lying awake the night before, Elsie had heard her parents discussing that they may lose their home if things didn't turn around. And now, as she stared down at the bowl of porridge, Elsie's fluffy ears sagged with sorrow. "Are we gonna have a Winter's Crest meal tonight?" Micah, her younger brother, blurted out. Mother and Father looked up from their eating, unsure what to say. "All the kids at school were talking about how they're going to open presents tomorrow morning and have a big feast tonight with mutton and stuffed pastries and piping hot cider," he continued excitedly. "Well, we may not be able to have all that," Father replied, "but we'll try and do something." He nervously looked to Mother, who quickly changed the subject. "Hurry up with your breakfast, children, or you'll be late for school. Come, come." Elsie and Micah trudged through the streets toward the schoolhouse. Mother had mended the children's old coats so many times they resembled patchwork quilts. While they were stitched with love and care, the early morning breeze rushed down from the mountains into the streets, causing little Micah's teeth to chatter. "Here," Elsie said, taking his hands and cupping them as she blew warm breath, making a cloud of mist in the brisk wind. "Look!" exclaimed Micah, pulling his hand away to point. Following his finger, Elsie saw a skinny dog with white fur and brown spots ambling down the street. "I've never seen it before. I wonder whose it is," pondered Elsie. "Happy Winter's Crest, doggy!" Micah shouted from across the way. The dog barked back as if it understood the good tidings. The kids passed by the same storefronts they always did. There was the garment shop with its fur-lined parkas and elegant fabrics on display. There was the thatch-roofed tavern with its faint sound of laughter and song. And lastly, there was an arcane emporium with its shopkeeper leaning against the entryway, busking and calling out to entice customers. "Come one, come all, feast your eyes on fine art from around the globe. Exotic artifacts, beautiful baubles, a plethora of priceless prizes could all be yours." But on this day, there was something new. On the corner stood an old dwarven man in a thick red overcoat, a cowl on his head, and a mischievous glint in his eye. He was ringing a bell, standing next to a collection pot and crying out, "Alms for the poor! Charity for the poor!" As Micah and Elsie passed the dwarf, Elsie patted her pockets, apologizing. "I'm sorry, we don't have any money to give." "But when we do, we'll be sure to donate," Micah eagerly chimed in. "That's very generous of you both," the dwarf replied, with a wink and a smile, then continued on with his refrain. "Alms for the poor, charity for the poor." As they approached the schoolhouse, Elsie bent down to her brother's height and brushed her hand through his moppy hair. "Micah, you have to understand that times are tough, so there's not going to be a special meal tonight, and probably no gifts tomorrow and no coin to give away." Micah's cow-like ears flicked in confusion. "Why not?" he asked, a frown creeping across his face. "Look around," she said. "Many stores are boarded up like Father's, and the ones that are open barely get customers. It's hard times all around, and it's hardest for Mother and Father. I wish there was some way we could help, but we don't have any money." "Well," he wondered, "why don't we make some and surprise them with a feast?" "How?" his sister asked. Micah paused for a moment, working it out in his head. Suddenly, his eyes brightened with the spark of an idea. "I'll see you after school," he chirped before dashing off. When school let out, all the children ran out of the building to celebrate the holiday. As her classmates bolted by, Elsie waited at her usual spot for her brother. "I heard it may snow tonight," one student exclaimed, with tusks 2 sizes too big for his mouth. "It's gonna, and that's a fact. A blizzard's blowing down from the north," another continued. The teacher called out in a sing-song voice, "Happy Winter's Crest Eve, children. Have the most glorious time, and remember, there will be no school tomorrow." Then, at last, little Micah came running out behind the teacher, awkwardly carrying a sheet of canvas. "Look," he said proudly, unfurling the cloth to reveal a charcoal drawing. It was simply crafted, clearly the work of a young child. It showed Elsie and Micah holding hands, their parents on either side of them. Micah had drawn a family portrait. "It's a nice sketch," offered his sister. "Oh, it's more than a sketch," replied Micah. "It's our winter's feast." Off Elsie's confusion, Micah continued, "Don't you see? We can sell this and make enough money to help Mother and Father." Elsie almost let out a laugh, but stopped when she saw how earnest he was. She couldn't bear to dash his hopes, so she smiled and said, "I guess we can see if anyone would be interested, but don't be sad if we don't have any luck." "We can certainly try," Micah howled. The 2 fey-giant kids entered the garment shop. A bell above the door clinked, and a prim elf dressmaker with touches of gray in her hair pulled behind long pointed ears stepped out from the back. She wore a deep green dress that stretched up her neck, brushing the edges of her chin. "May I help you?" she asked. Unsure what to do next, Elsie shuffled up to her and pulled out Micah's portrait, her brother sticking close behind. "We would like to help our family this holiday, and we thought you might like to buy a picture to decorate your store?" The elf inspected the piece sternly for a moment and then looked up. "I'm sorry, I'm not able to buy decorations these days. But I like your coat, it's very colorful. Did your mother make it?" Elsie hesitated. "Yes," she said softly. "She sews, but mostly takes in laundry these days." "Well, she's very talented. This is quality work." The dressmaker paused. "Unfortunately, times are tough, and I can barely keep this place open, but I'd like for you to have this." The elven lady handed Elsie a thick woolen scarf, the same shade of green as her dress. "When I'm not busy, I sometimes knit to pass the time, and it has been rather chilly of late." The children thanked her for her generosity and left the shop. Outside, Micah began shivering again. "Here, you're shaking like a leaf," Elsie whispered, wrapping her new scarf around his neck. "It's yours, though. Don't you want it?" her brother protested. "Don't be silly, take it," she insisted. Smiling, Micah clasped his sister's hand, and together they set off to their next stop. Elsie and Micah pushed the large wooden door of the tavern open. Inside, they were greeted with sounds of merriment and aromas of baked treats dancing through the space. The room was filled with warm light and toasty air from a roaring fire in the hearth. They stepped up to the bar where a swarthy half-orc with a bulbous nose and ruddy cheeks whistled to himself. "Embers, may I get you anything this fine winter's evening?" he bellowed, polishing a glass. Micah climbed up on a bar stool and presented his portrait. The tavern keeper took it and examined it admiringly. "What a delightful drawing! Did you make this?" "Yes, sir. Do you want to buy it?" Micah gleamed. "Oh, thank you for the offer. But first, may I ask why you're selling such a work of art?" "We want to help our parents afford a big dinner tonight for Winter's Crest Eve. Our dad's a cobbler and he lost his job," Elsie explained, a little embarrassed. "Yeah," Micah added, "but he still makes great shoes." He looked down at his leather boots as if noticing them for the first time. The tavern keep leaned over the bar to inspect the boots, clicking his tongue, impressed. "He's very talented. That's quality work. Mayhaps his luck will turn around with the new year." "But we want to help them now," Micah insisted.
Alas, we don't get as many customers as we used to these days, so I'm not sure I'm able to buy that,"
the tavern keep intoned, but then he hesitated, forming a new idea.
"You know what? Wait just one moment."
The tavern keeper stepped into the back and returned with a shank bone, which he had wrapped up in a large sheet of brown butcher paper.
"Now, this isn't much, but we sometimes have a little food left over from the lunch rush. Take this back to your family, and I'm sure your parents can whip it into a hearty and delicious stew."
Thanking him profusely, Elsie and Micah left the tavern. Night had begun to fall, and with it came the first flakes of snow blowing down from the nearby mountains. "Let's hurry," Elsie urged. "That blizzard is already starting." After a few steps, though, Micah suddenly stopped and stood perfectly still. Elsie waved him to keep moving. "Come on," she insisted. "It's getting late." Micah tilted his head. "Do you hear that?" he said. Elsie stopped to listen. She could hear something coming from a side alley, a faint whimper. They slowly crept into the alley, searching. The sound grew louder, and eventually they found the source of the cry. In between a stack of crates and discarded lumber was the skinny stray dog with the white fur and brown spots. It was huddled in a dirty recess, shuddering. Micah gasped and reached down to pet it. "Elsie, we have to take it home," he implored. "We can't afford another mouth to feed," Elsie replied sadly. "You know Mother and Father won't let us keep it." "But we have to do something," Micah begged. "I know." He walked over to Elsie and reached into her satchel for the shank bone. "Can we give him this at least? He needs it more than we do." With a sigh and a gentle smile, Elsie agreed. Micah set the bone in front of the dog. It immediately began chewing on the bits of meat and gristle, its tail wagging joyfully. Micah also took the green knit scarf from around his neck and tucked it under the dog, forming a makeshift bed. The dog, shivering only moments ago, snuggled into its new bed, cozy and happy. After a few more pets on its head and scratches on its back, the young fey-giants headed off. Though the wind and snow seemed especially cold, the two children were undeterred. They trudged to the last stop on the block, the Arcane Emporium. Inside, a friendly horned devilkin swished and flicked his feather duster at sculptures and art pieces with an elegant flourish. As the children entered, he turned to greet them, passing the duster off to his tail, which took it and continued to dust.
"Welcome, travelers. What brings you to my humble home for fantastic rarefied relics?"
the devilkin shopkeeper asked. As they took in the sheer variety of odd and beautiful objects, Elsie and Micah forgot themselves for a moment. "Where do all these things come from?" Micah asked, amazed.
"Why, from all around the globe, young lad,"
smiled the shopkeeper.
"From Drusar and Zadash and every place in between. Like this carving from Feolin, made of pure jade, and this fine dwarvish etching is from Craghammer. Yes, these are the finest curios you'll find in all of Cravarad. Are you looking for anything in particular?"
Hearing how exceptional and most likely expensive his collection was, Elsie realized that their plan for making money was a hopeless one. "No, sorry to bother you, sir," she mumbled and turned to leave.
"Now wait, young lady, don't be glum. These relics may be exotic, but I can be fair with their cost. Did you come to find a Winter's Crest gift for your family?"
Micah pushed past his sister. "We didn't want to buy anything, mister. We want to sell you something to help our family for the holidays." "But it's not anything you'd want to display in such a fancy store," Elsie interjected.
"I believe that's for me to decide. May I see it?"
Elsie reluctantly pulled the portrait out of her satchel and handed it to the shopkeeper. "My brother here drew this." The shopkeeper regarded it for a moment, then smiled sincerely.
"He's very talented. This is quality work. But I think you should give this to your parents as a gift. It would be more valuable to them than me," he explained. "Besides, selling art is a challenging endeavor, even in the best of times, and times are not the best right now."
Then, reaching into his counter drawer, he added,
"Here, Take a little something to help."
He pulled out a silver piece and flipped it to them. The coin made a bright metallic shing as it landed in Micah's little hands. He looked up at the Devilkin shopkeeper bewildered, asking, "Are you sure?"
"Of course,"
the man replied.
"It is the season of kindness. Happy holiday, both of you, and to your parents as well."
With a pep in their step, the two children hopped outside onto the snowy street. Somehow the winter storm didn't seem quite so cold, and the night didn't seem quite so dark for Elsie and Micah. However, their joy was short-lived, as they heard the sound of a familiar voice crying out from a nearby street corner.
"Alms for the poor! Charity for the poor!"
It was the old dwarven man collecting charity with his feeble pot and beaming smile. Elsie and Micah looked at each other, remembering what they had promised him earlier that day. Both knowing what the other was thinking, Micah nodded to Elsie, and they walked over to the old man.
"Hello, children, and happy winter's Crest Eve. Shouldn't you be home with your family?"
he asked. "We're headed there now," Elsie said, "but wanted to give you something to help the poor." Micah reached into his pocket and pulled out the silver coin they had just been given. "We promised we'd give you something if we could, so here you go," Micah said, dropping the coin into the old dwarf's pot.
"A full silver? That's quite a bit. Are you sure you can part with that?"
Elsie nodded. "There are others who need it more than we do."
"That's very generous of you," grinned the old man. "And maybe in turn there's something I can do for you and your parents."
He combed his fingers through the white hairs of his beard and thought.
"You know, winter's Crest is a magical time of year, a time when wishes can come true. I heard you hope to give your family a wonderful meal to feast upon," he said.
Then, leaning closer, he whispered,
"There's perhaps a wee bit of magic that could help make that happen."
Elsie and Micah's eyes lit up in wonder and hope. But the old man stood straight again, as if just remembering.
"The only problem is, it requires an element that costs 1,000 gold pieces."
The children's hopes sank as quickly as they had risen. "Magic costs money?" Micah asked, twisting his face in confusion. "That's stupid."
"You don't know the half of it,"
the old dwarf chuckled, scratching his belly.
"May I see that portrait you've been trying to sell?"
Elsie pulled out Micah's portrait and handed it to the dwarf, who ran his fingers over the charcoal with reverence.
"Ah, yes,"
he intoned.
"This could help us make some magic."
"That's not worth 1,000 gold pieces, though," Elsie stated matter-of-factly.
"I disagree,"
countered the dwarf, still examining the artwork.
"I think it's worth more than that. It represents all the love and thoughtfulness you two have shown your parents, the charity you've shown each other, a stray dog, and even the poor you've never met. And finally, the old fuddy-duddy wizards at the Soltress Academy will never admit this, but the secret about magic items is..."
The dwarf's face was practically glowing with light-hearted mischief.
"If someone is willing to pay that price, well, then it's worth that much."
The dwarf reached into his thick red overcoat and from some unseen pocket withdrew a weathered coin purse.
"I'd like to buy this from you, if that's all right," he winked.
Elsie opened the pouch, revealing hundreds of glistening gold coins. Her mouth hung open with shock, realizing this seemingly destitute man was carrying around a small fortune. But before she or Micah could speak, the dwarf had closed it tight and placed it in her palm, gently pushing them down the street.
"Now, let's get you two rascals home before your parents worry themselves sick."
Elsie tried to protest, but it was futile. Every time she opened her mouth to speak, the blizzard wind blew faster and louder, almost as if the storm itself didn't want her to be heard. And before she or Micah realized it, the dwarf had led them into the white of the storm. Back at their home, Father paced worriedly, looking through a window but seeing only snow. Mother busied herself tending to a stew pot hanging over the fire. "Don't fret," Mother called, trying to convince herself as much as her husband. "I'm sure they'll be home soon."
"It's a mess out there.
I should go and look for them, Father said, gathering his coat and hat. Just then they heard a sound from outside. It was the faint sound of singing. Opening the front door, they saw a remarkable sight. The wind died down and the snow seemed to stop at an instant, as if the blizzard simply turned off. Mother and Father squinted through the now clear evening at a crowd of village folk plodding up the street their way. And leading the procession was Elsie, Micah, and the old dwarf. Behind them marched the elven dressmaker, the doublekin shopkeeper, as well as the half-orc tavern keeper, followed by his patrons who all joined in a spirited carol as they approached the cottage. "Mother! Father! Our friends are joining us for a winter's feast!" Micah cheered. The parents looked back in confused silence before Mother gathered herself and spoke. "All of these people?" she asked her children, mystified. "All of them," replied Elsie, grinning from ear to ear. Mother glanced back at their quaint cottage, a bit ashamed. "You're all welcome to join us, but I'm afraid we don't even have enough food for ourselves." "Not to worry, my dear lady." The old dwarf stepped forward with a smile. "Dinner is on me." With a chuckle, he pulled off his cowl, revealing a larger-than-life dwarf with pink cheeks and a beard as white as the fallen snow. "My name is Ultgar, and it's a pleasure to make your family's acquaintance," he announced. "May we come in out of the cold?" "Why, yes, of course," Mother said, stepping inside to allow the merry band of revelers to enter the humble abode. Everyone gathered around their cozy dinner table. It was a tight squeeze, but somehow the cottage had just enough room for everyone. Elsie and Micah stood beside their father and mother, beaming with joy. Ultgar took out his empty collection pot and set it on the table. "What's this now?" Father asked. "Just a wee bit of holiday magic," reassured Ultgar. He took the portrait he had bought and held it before the parents. "Your son and daughter made this, and the drawing itself is filled with as much love as the family it depicts," he told them. Mother and Father, still confused, squeezed their children with pride. Ultgar placed the drawing in the pot. "Technically, the pot itself should be worth 1,000 gold pieces, but magic is more art than science. I think this wee combination should work just fine." With everyone leaning forward to watch, he then closed his eyes, wiggled his rosy nose, and placed his hands over the components. Elsie heard Ultgar utter something under his breath, and all at once something shifted in the air, like a ripple made of light. Before she realized what was happening, a flash of sparkling energy washed across them, and the room was transformed before everyone's eyes. Where the pot had sat a moment before, now appeared dozens of plates, trays, dishes, and tins bursting with food. It was more food than Elsie had seen in one place in her entire life. There was a roasted turkey, beside it a roasted duck, breads and pastries, steaming vegetables, and decorated cakes with pitchers of hot cocoa, cold cider, and bubbling ale. In fact, there wasn't enough table for all this food. Looking around their cottage, Elsie and Micah spotted pies cooling on the mantel and trays of baked cookies stacked high on Father's workbench. Their woodpile was suddenly enormous, and the fire roared. Streamers hung from the ceiling beams in reds and golds, and their lantern burned as bright as it ever had. As Father and Mother and Micah and Elsie looked on in wonderment, they all silently agreed it was a winter's Crest miracle. That night was the happiest the family had been. There was laughter and song and dancing and oh, so much yummy food. At one point, Elsie remembered the money Ultgar had paid for the sketch. She tried to return it, but he would have none of that. "Little one, you must keep it," Ultgar explained. "If I accepted it back, then young Micah's portrait wouldn't have been worth 1,000 gold, and the magic would be undone. So you see, you and your brother must keep that money and use it to make your family's winter a bit brighter." Elsie promised that she would. Then Ultgar turned to Micah, adding, "And one more condition. You have to take care of my wee pup." Suddenly, Micah spied the familiar white fur and brown spots at his feet. The skinny dog was curled up at the foot of the table, gnawing contentedly on a bone, the green scarf still wrapped around its neck. Micah gasped at the idea of his very own dog.
You must both promise to give him a name, a home, and lots of scratches. Understand?
Demanded Oltgar, his hands on his hips. Both children nodded vigorously in agreement. Sometime in the hours of merriment, as Elsie and Micah headed off to sleep, they realized that Oltgar was no longer in the cottage. They asked where he had gone, but no one could recall seeing him leave, and sure enough, there were no footprints in the snow outside their front door. Elsie wanted to thank him one last time, but when she gazed at the joy in the room and the smile on her parents' faces, she had a feeling the old dwarf knew how grateful they were. The next morning when Elsie awoke, winter's crest had arrived. The village sparkled in the morning light with its blanket of snow. She looked around the bedroom, finding Micah asleep on his cot with the dog curled up in his arms, both happily dreaming wonderful dreams. Downstairs, the table was somehow still full of delicious food waiting to be enjoyed. And she noticed something new as well. Beautifully crafted wooden toys with festive bows sitting on Father's workbench, and hanging above the crackling fire was Micah's family portrait in a polished wooden frame. As Elsie looked up at the image of her and Micah, father and mother, together as a family, she realized that the true feast hadn't been the food they ate, but the love they all shared with each other. The end.
Hello, my name is Caleb Widogast, and I will be reading Himmelsschloss, The Castle in the Sky, written by Liam O'Brien. Back when these lands were younger than they are now, and the world was simpler in some ways, yet also full of a great many wonders, there was a village perched on the slopes of a mountain. And in this village, a young girl named Little Sparrow resided with her mother and father. They were a humble family, and though they lived on very little, the mountain provided all they truly needed. Their days were mostly quiet as they rose with the sun and lived forever from the land. And just as the earth nourished their people, so too did the mountain folk strive to nourish the earth. And above all else, they were happy. But Little Sparrow was never so joyful as when she took to the air. Oh, how she loved to soar above the mountain with her mother and father, to see all the world stretch out below them. She reveled in the freedom of their flights, rivaled only by the pleasure of returning to her little home nested high along its ridge. "Can we go out again tomorrow and see all there is to see?" she would ask her parents nightly when they tucked her into bed. And every night they'd answer with a smile, "Of course, Little Sparrow, as long as we are with you, the sky is yours to roam." On one such a day, as the family soared over the surrounding countryside and Little Sparrow flew playful circles around her parents, the clouds overhead darkened eerily, and a powerful wind began to blow. Her mother and father were strong of wing, but Little Sparrow was still so very young that, try as she might, she could not reach them in the sky. She flapped her little wings as hard as she could, but when a violent gust of wind caught her in its torrent, she was tossed into the menacing clouds. She tumbled end over end, losing all notion of up or down, separated from her mother and father. Little Sparrow was now lost in the darkness and very frightened. Battling the wind, she flew and flew, desperate to find any sign of her parents or the land below. But the seething squall had engulfed her now, and she could scarcely see anything at all. Suddenly, a burst of lightning sundered the darkness, and the child's heart quailed. Little Sparrow realized that she was, in fact, not alone at all. For the briefest moment, in that flash of illumination, the girl saw a great many shadowy forms moving through the storm before darkness blanketed her once more. She soon began to hear whispers on the wind, wicked and cruel and hungry. It wasn't long before another streak of lightning tore through the dark, revealing the shadows once more, twice as many now, and closer. Terrified, Little Sparrow fled blindly through the darkness with every ounce of strength left in her. In the squall, she could hear the menacing shadows pursuing her. She flew and she flew, and she flew farther still till she thought she could fly no more. Just as she believed her end was at hand, she burst from the dark into deep blue sky and sunlight. The vault of the heavens above her was clear and bright, yet no inch of land could be spotted below. Instead, she now sailed above an endless carpet of gentle white clouds. Frightened, Little Sparrow stole a quick glance back at the swell of the storm. The child was shocked to discover that the tempest was fast abating, though for the briefest of moments she thought she could see a ripple of shadow along the edges of the clouds. But then it was gone, and the girl was alone in the sky. Little Sparrow was terribly weary, for she had flown so long and climbed so high that her wings could barely hold her. If only she had stayed closer to her mother and father. If only they were home in their cozy little nest on the cliffs. It was at that moment that the child noticed something new to wonder at. Off in the distance, she could see towers shining in the sunlight. To her astonishment, she spied a gleaming castle skimming along the cloud tops. With a burst of hope, she beat her wings on the air, summoning the very ends of her strength. If she could just make it a little farther, she could at last sit down and rest there a while. Then perhaps she could attempt the journey home. At last, Little Sparrow was able to drift down toward that impossible citadel in the sky. Passing over the castle walls, she gasped, for all of a sudden she found herself sailing through a sea of colorful kites. Red, yellow, blue, and everything in between. She was so startled by the swirl of color around her that she immediately started to plummet. Down she fell, fearing the worst, when splash! She landed right into a beautiful, babbling fountain. And things only grew more curious from there. As the child looked about from the sparkling pool, Little Sparrow came to realize she had splashed down into the middle of a grand parade. And what a parade it was! Why, this was a procession of some of the strangest beasts to have ever gathered. There were scaly creatures and great winged ones, some beautiful and others bizarre. A few strode forth on 2 legs, while others walked on 20. And at the head of the procession walked a fantastical beast with the body of a lion and the sagely face of a man, beaming at the crowds around him. And such an audience! There were lords and ladies in abundance. They loomed like giants, wearing fine garments the likes of which Little Sparrow had never seen. And stranger still, all about the courtyard, there were the most splendid statues of silver and gold that walked as though they were living. Some marched merrily along in the parade, no less. Out of sorts and utterly exhausted, Little Sparrow hardly knew what to make of it all. Timidly, she drew herself out from the fountain, shaking the damp from her feathers. In a heartbeat, the pageantry flew into a chaos. Upon seeing the child, the whole gathering cried out in a panic. The beasts howled and screeched, while the lords and ladies all swooned in alarm. Soon the statues all moved to encircle the child, barring her there at the fountain. "What is it?" some cried. Come from where? Cried others. We must know what purpose has brought the thing here. No matter, just catch it, and quick. Little Sparrow's heart sank at this clamor, but before things could grow any worse, a voice rang over the din. Peace, I say, peace one and all. A knight, tall and noble, stepped forth from the throng, his voice like a bell in the square. It is not for us to decide, but the queen. The council shall gather with the queen and her king. Hold your peace, pray you all, we shall see. The crowd continued to murmur, but presently a woman from the crowd joined the knight. She was tall and slender, like a willow, and seemed to the child to carry herself with uncanny grace, saying, Till then, hie you hence. No more bickering now. I shall look after our guest, and we'll settle this all on the morrow. With that, she gathered up Little Sparrow and carried her away from the tumult to the top of one of the castle's many beautiful towers, introducing herself to the child as royal advisor to the queen. Grateful to this lady, but still very much afraid, the child asked, Forgive me, miss, have I done something wrong? I am only lost and mean no mischief here. The woman gazed down at her with a tender eye, saying, I shouldn't think so, little one. Still, the lords of the sky are not accustomed to uninvited guests. Tell me, how came you to our fair city in the clouds? Little Sparrow was relieved by her kindness and confessed all. How she had been separated from her mother and father, how the sudden storm had taken her with no warning, and how she'd fled from the shadows who'd threatened her on the borders of this unfamiliar realm. The woman's brow darkened, but before the child could question why, she heard a joyous voice echoing up from the square. Gazing out the window, Little Sparrow gasped, for the visage of a pale, smiling king in a golden crown appeared in the fountain below. Worry not, all is well. Our days of the eld are behind us. The heavens are ours, will not be undone. Our glory it ever shall bind us. Upon hearing this, the beasts and lordlings finally abandoned their squabbling and emptied the square. In the tower, the gentle woman tucked the child into a bed far larger than she, saying, Rest your weary wings, Little Sparrow. We shall sort this out in the morn. As the child struggled to sleep, she watched the moons drifting in the sky, wondering if her parents were seeing them as well. She prayed they could gaze on them together ere long. With that wish in her heart, she finally drifted off to slumber, though her dreams were troubled by shadows whispering in the dark, drawing ever closer. In the morning, the royal advisor woke the child, and after they'd shared a breakfast together and watched the clouds drift lazily by the castle's many towers, she took Little Sparrow on a walk about the grounds, showing her the wonders of that marvelous place. They crossed under a panoply of dancing kites and entered the castle proper, where the woman led Little Sparrow through a great many displays of magic and beauty. There was a vaulting, domed chamber painted from floor to ceiling with all the bodies of the night sky, an enchanting indoor garden where the girl met a noble old griffin cloaked in a mantle of stars, a vast library of scrolls and tomes lit by the scores of twinkling lanterns. They even wandered the halls of an exquisitely jeweled labyrinth that hummed with the music of 1,000 chimes and seemed to shift as they roamed the shining halls. Little Sparrow had never seen so many astonishing sights, and it was a wonder to her that these lords and ladies of the sky could have so much, yet be so troubled. But before she could puzzle over it any further, the mannerly knight came looking to fetch them, saying, The queen is at court, and would meet our young traveller. If it pleases you, the council is called. He delivered them to a grand throne room in the heart of the castle, ushering them through a crowd awash with rumor and whispers. But standing beyond those lords and ladies, Little Sparrow took in a sight more breathtaking than all that came before. There, at the center of the hall, stood a single tree, more beautiful than any the girl had ever laid eyes on, its leaves a burnished gold that shone with astonishing luster. Beneath its boughs, the king sat by his queen, paired like the moons in the sky. He, beaming and bright, she, pensive and knowing. Presently the knight called for peace in the hall, and a council of the queen's wisest assembled at the foot of the tree. Little Sparrow stood anxiously, scarcely able to breathe, as the queen's piercing eyes read her like the pages of a book. Her voice cut the air. "My adviser has told us what she can of you, childling, recounted your unlikely journey and the dangers that you chanced to walk my halls. But I would hear of this from you, young one. How is it that you stand beneath the naming tree, so far beyond your ken?" Nervous though she was, Little Sparrow found her voice, beseeching the watchful lady. "It was no choice of mine, great queen, and if I had one, it would surely be to stay at my mother's and father's sides. The storm stole me from them. Fortunate I am to have escaped at all, for the shadows that beset me in those darkened skies near but had me in the end. And fearful am I still, for this was all but at your door." At that, the entire room stirred to life as the many lords and ladies began to argue over the child's words. "Devilry at our gates, this bodes of some calamity. We must ready ourselves, we are not without defenses. This is foolishness, the surface dweller lies. The arts we wield are unparalleled, the gods themselves could not touch us here. That child was able to scale our walls. If she can, more will come." Rising to his feet, the king called out to the troubled assembly, imploring them to calm. "Worry not, sweet lords and ladies, there is no need to fear. The child's confused, she merely jumps at shadows. No darkness can fall here. No." The queen's clear voice cut through the air, and all the room fell silent. Her king turned toward his love, the smile fading from his lips. "No, my king, I see this child. There is no doubt within her." And as the queen rose from her throne, the child could see a sadness settle in her eyes. She looked to the tree of gold above, sighing. "We have sailed too high, thinking we could leave the world below in shadow and grasp the sun and stars and all for ourselves, simply because they were in reach. To hang so fair a gem from the sky, of course there are those who seek to pluck it down." "And pluck it down we shall." It was the knight who spoke, and all attending gasped in great dismay. For all about the knight's person a pool of shadow spread, and it wreathed him in darkness. No cloud so high, no wall so sound, no knowledge so rare and hoarded can shelter your covetous hearts. From the darkness you fled, and to darkness you shall rejoin." Suddenly there was a ghastly moaning in the room, like misery come to life, and more shadows sprang up all about the chamber, enveloping the souls at hand. The queen's eyes glittered coldly, and her voice rang out through the bedlam. "You shall not grasp what you cannot reach. So be it then. There are other realms than these." And without any word of warning, the queen began to cast a spell upon the tree, which then started to glow with a light all its own. The knight stalked toward her throne, his eyes like burning embers amidst the darkness shrouding him. "How right you are. Your day has come. How could it not cast shadow on this place to fly so close to the sun?" With a cry, the king charged the shadowy knight, desperate to shield his queen. But his foe was too strong, and the pale king fell, his crown stained with blood. Little Sparrow hid herself near the foot of the tree as shadow crept its way throughout the hall, while at its heart the queen continued to work her magic upon the tree. Darkness fell, and the night was near upon her, yet still she wrought her spell. Then a mighty rift was torn upon the surface of the trunk. A powerful wind began to blow, and everything, knight, queen, king, and all, was drawn unto that awful tear. The queen's advisor, knowing full well what magic was upon them, broke the smallest of twigs from the golden tree and pressed it into Little Sparrow's hands, imploring her, "Keep this safe, and with it your knowledge of what happened here. I pray that you will wield it more wisely than those from whom you inherit it, toward a good for all to share. Our time in these skies is passing, but though we fade, there are many more dreams still possible. It will be up to you to dream them." The noble scholar embraced the child, weaving a charm of her own. In a single beat of her heart, the tree, the hall, and all beside them vanished. Little Sparrow felt a cold rush of wind upon her face, and for a fleeting moment, she was falling. But as her eyes peeled open and gazed upon a vast blue sky, she quickly spread her wings and fell into a wide and soaring arc. Fervently, she sought in all directions for the flying citadel, but queens and crowns and castle walls were nowhere to be found. The sky was perfect and clear to the horizon's edges, with nary a cloud in sight, and the girl could at last see the fertile green world beckoning her from below. Her mind roiled with questions. Had the queen truly taken them away? Were they gone? Were they safe? Were they ever to return? Perhaps she thought these fraught last hours were visions of some dream. But the sprig of gold tucked safely in her belt, and the child's own aching heart told her otherwise. Feeling very alone, Little Sparrow turned her eye to the earth below in search of her mountain, but she did not recognize these lands. She wondered how far she'd sailed in that strange place, and if she would indeed ever see her mother and father again. It was only then that the child spotted something glinting in a far-off corner of the sky. Veering in that direction, the girl's heart leaped as she closed the distance and found a single golden kite slowly making its way across the firmament. It brought a smile to the child's face, both sad and sweet, and since she knew not where her home lay, she followed the pretty little kite, pondering all she'd seen. Her thoughts wound their way amongst the castle's spires, through its splendid halls and vibrant denizens, and eventually threaded reverently amongst the branches of the golden tree at the city's heart. Some time later, Little Sparrow roused herself from her thoughts and gasped. For beyond the little kite, she recognized her own dear mountain's peak rising in the distance. Her heart fluttered with joy, and she pressed on eagerly, following the kite all the way down to the familiar climes of her home and her mother's and father's loving arms. And there she lived a great many years, nourishing the land and nourished by it, and she was happy all her days. The little branch of gold she'd carried was planted there at the foot of Sparrow's Mountain, and it grew into a splendid tree with a tremendous beauty of its own. And from its fruit sprang all the knowledge that we now share in this late age, with all the troubles and the blessings that accompany it. These gifts are sometimes used for ill, and other times for good. We wonder if we'll reach the sun, but never if we should.
Thank you for listening to a very special long rest. We hope you enjoyed your time with us as much as we did sharing these lovely stories with you. Until next time, have a good evening and rest easy.